Agora, durante toda a campanha que terminou com sua eleição para mais um mandato lá à frente do governo americano, Donald Trump negou que fosse seguir o Projeto 2025. O que é isso? É uma espécie de catálogo com diretrizes da extrema direita americana a serem implementadas em diversos setores e que foi denunciado, por exemplo, à época da campanha por Kamala Harris, como sendo uma ameaça à democracia, porque trazia ali vários mecanismos que acabavam minando por dentro a democracia. Pois o jornalista Guga Graham, autor do livro O Projeto, um livro que foi publicado no Brasil também, acredita que nesse primeiro ano de governo, Donald Trump não apenas seguiu aquelas orientações, como foi além. E o Guga Chacra conversou com o autor, o jornalista, na semana passada, lá em Nova Iorque. Vale a pena acompanhar esse papo.
When you published your book, it was like the beginning of Trump's second term. Now, it has been like 11 months almost of his presidency. How do you see his implementation of the project 2025 by now?
The thing that I think sticks out most is the way he has seized control of the executive branch in the ways that Project 2025 lays out. So laying off civil servants, seizing control of departments, exerting control over the Justice Department, and also taking power over things like regulatory agencies, the FCC, the FEC, and at the same time sidelining Congress. So all of these things are essential to being able to do the policy goals, and they've moved, I think, really a very long way in that seizure of power.
So he's on track to implement the Project 2025. You still think like that?
I think he's, if anything, ahead of where I would have guessed. He's had more success in those sorts of things. And even when the policy goals haven't happened yet, he's laid the groundwork and it allows him to do things that he hasn't done yet. And I think they're surprised by how far they've managed to get.
And how do you see the institutions that are capitulating to Trump, like Columbia University or some law firms? How does it affect his behavior?
He clearly gets a lot of charge when he's able to get these organizations to capitulate, and I think then that builds momentum. So when he has, for example, tech companies at the very beginning of the administration started coming toward him, that gave him more sort of soft power. And I think in universities, in law firms, in major media organizations, as long as there's a sense that Trump is winning, they will continue to try to get on his good side, and we see that kind of process going on.
And the Project 2025, do you see the US in the future resembling a country like Hungary and Turkey?
I think in many ways it already does. The people involved in Project 2025 are trying to emulate those. We know that they have taken hints from places like Hungary. There's a great deal of respect for Viktor Orban and desire to replicate what he does. So you have, for example, attempts to capture a media establishment. You have attempts to weaponize the government against political enemies. You have trying to capture institutions like universities. The idea is not to create a single party state. It's simply to make it so it's very hard for anybody to have independent power to challenge Trump in a meaningful way. And it also includes Congress and the courts.
But Erdogan and Orban, they took years to implement their plans. In the case of Trump, it has been months, right?
I think there are two things, though, that affect that. One is they are able to learn from the example of somebody like Orban. So they're not inventing it from scratch. They also had 4 years in office where they struggled a great deal, and then they had 4 years out of office to sort of plan. And Project 2025, I think, is very much a product of those 4 years during the Biden administration when they were thinking about what went wrong from their perspective and how they could fix it. And you can see them being much more effective from having that time to regroup.
In authoritarian regimes, people always say that the opposition is really important. How do you see the Democrats here in the US so far?
I think they're still struggling to recover from 2024. They were so taken aback by what happened in that election, by the switch of candidates, by the sort of collapse of Biden's popularity, and by Kamala Harris's attempt, and then by the result. They never seem to be able to find their feet. They're still arguing over what went wrong in the 2024 election. And we see even in the shutdown this disagreement and strategy on how best to fight Republicans. I think Democrats have the advantage that Trump is fairly unpopular. Many of his policies are unpopular. He's personally unpopular. And that has allowed them to triumph in some of these elections despite not having a strong strategy. But they're not sort of galvanizing people who oppose Trump. They're very personally unpopular. And I think if Trump's more authoritarian impulses are going to be stopped, it's going to require Democrats getting their footing much more than they have.
And how do you see the Democrats in the future? Because Mamdani just won here. He cannot be a presidential candidate. He's not American born. But how do you see his leadership?
How are we doing today?
His discourse can be the discourse of the whole Democratic Party or no?
I think it's difficult for his specific platform to translate to all Democrats simply because New York City is much more progressive than a lot of the country. And you see in somewhere like Virginia, much more moderate candidates winning. I think there are two big things that I take from Mamdani's victory that I think a lot of Democrats can and will take lessons for. One of those is the focus on affordability. It's something that's a real problem for the Trump administration, and it's a problem all over the country. In New York City, the question is rent. It's rent in other places. It's groceries. It's all of these questions in the rest of the country. But there's also the communication. In a moment when Democrats seem very pessimistic, where they seem mostly about opposing Trump, where they seem disorganized, Mamdani had a really optimistic vision. He was able to communicate really clearly, whether that was in an interview, on social media, on a debate stage, in all of these forums. And I think that communication style is something Democrats are going to be studying very closely.
So, and next year election, it will be really hard for the Democrats to win the Senate. But do you see a way for them to win in the House, or it will be?
It's a little up in the air, partly because of these things that Trump is doing to shift the board. So when you see gerrymandering, for example, redistricting, it makes it more difficult for Democrats to win. And where that shakes out, we still don't quite know, since more states are still working on it. But I think the size of Democrats' victories in 2025 suggests that they do have a really good shot at winning the House, and maybe even an outside shot at winning the Senate.
And how do you see the press? Like, you work for a major traditional magazine, The Atlantic. How do you see the work of the press nowadays? We talked about the opposition, but the press is also really important when you might have an authoritarian regime.
I think it's really precarious. And there are publications, I feel very lucky to work for a publication where we've been told to do our best work and to tell the truth and to report aggressively. But you see at other organizations, the administration very effectively bullying them. And they're using government power in ways that hasn't been used before. And I think corporations are responding to that in ways that are really troubling but understandable. If you are a major entertainment corporation like Disney, ABC News is a small part of your portfolio. If you're Paramount or Skydance, CBS News is a small part of your portfolio. And you may think, is it really worth sticking out our neck on this when we have all these other properties that we need to defend? So I think that kind of conglomerate ownership has caused a real problem. I worry that a lot of press organizations are losing some appetite to take on the administration. And we see faith in media decreasing. But I think now more than ever, it's very important that organizations report impartially and courageously.
And going back to the Project 2025, regarding tariffs, it was conflicting the view of the project regarding tariffs, right?
Yeah.
How do you see that?
It's very interesting because you can see in Project 2025 these long-standing divisions within the Republican Party between the old free traders who used to dominate and then the more Trump movement. And the project has these conflicting chapters, one for and one against tariffs. What we've seen from Trump in office is perhaps an even more aggressive view of tariffs than Project 2025's most aggressive vision. And there, Peter Navarro, who's now at the White House, argued for very aggressive protectionism against China. And instead, we've seen Trump using it as a tool of diplomacy, trying to bully Canada, trying to bully Brazil, in situations that don't have anything to do necessarily with trade deficit. So it seems to be a major tool for him, and yet we also see courts pushing back. So the future of protectionism, I think, is up in the air.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aí, então, muito interessante essa análise do jornalista David Graham, que é articulista da The Atlantic. Tem mais sobre isso lá no livro O Projeto. Vale a pena dar uma olhada porque é muito embasada. Embasada, interessante e assustadora essa análise, pelo que ela sinaliza, claro, em termos de futuro da solidez e da saúde da democracia americana, com todos os impactos que isso pode ter mundo afora. Aproveito para dar os parabéns ao meu camarada Guga Chacra pela entrevista, muito pertinente nesse momento.